The air in the St. Lazarus private wing didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled of money, a quiet, persistent scent woven from aged leather, cedarwood polish, and the faint, clean aroma of ozone from the silent air purifiers. For Zora Evans, however, it mostly smelled like survival. Each sterile, perfume breath was one more payment toward the astronomical bill for her grandmother's experimental treatment, a figure that lived like a coiled snake in the pit of her stomach. The number was precise, $287,451, and counting. She moved through the hushed, carpeted corridor with an economy of motion that was often mistaken for subservience. Her dark skin, the color of rich coffee, seemed to absorb the opulent, indirect lighting. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, immaculate bun, a regulation severity that betrayed none of its natural texture. The crisp, white nurse's uniform was a class marker, a cloak of invisibility in a world where visibility was a currency she couldn't afford. Her hands, though, were the tell. They were not the soft, hesitant hands of a servant. They were capable, sure, arranging the instruments on her medical cart with a geometric precision that was less about neatness and more about muscle memory from another life. Her dark eyes, watchful and intelligent, missed nothing: the subtle tremor in a patient's hand, the faint sheen of sweat on a nervous visitor's brow, the almost imperceptible dust motes dancing in a sliver of morning sun. This place wasn't just a hospital wing, it was a gilded cage where Seoul's most powerful men came to rust and decay in private. Zora was a ghost in their machine, a silent functionary meant to be felt but not seen, her presence as necessary and as unremarkable as the filtered air. She tolerated the casual dismissiveness, the way they looked through her as if she were made of glass, because Nana Rose's life depended on it. The memory of her grandmother's smile, weaker now but still defiant, was the armor she wore against the daily erosions of her dignity. That smile was worth $287,451. It was worth more. It was worth everything. Her cart glided to a stop outside Suite 7, the largest penthouse suite in the wing. Inside lay Chairman Park, the patriarch of the vast Hasten corporate empire. He was a fossil from a bygone era of honor and violence, now reduced to a still form under fine silk sheets, his presence in the world shrinking to the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. He rarely spoke, his eyes often closed, but Zora sometimes felt the weight of his gaze. It was not the vacant stare of the dying, but something else, something calculating. She treated him with the same meticulous care she gave all her patients, but with an added layer of respect for the legend he had been. He was a detail in the background of her survival, a quiet man in a corner who paid her salary by proxy. The double doors to the wing hissed open, and head nurse Kim scurried down the hall, her face pale and tight. The air shifted, the quiet tension ratcheting up into a palpable hum of anxiety. "He's coming," Nurse Kim whispered, her voice a frantic hiss. She didn't need to say the name. Everyone knew who he was: Park Min-jun, the chairman's son and heir apparent. A man whose cruelty was as legendary as his father's power. A ripple of fear went through the staff. Nurses straightened their uniforms, their movements becoming jerky and uncertain. An orderly, halfway through polishing a brass door handle, began rubbing it with a frantic energy. Park Min-jun treated the hospital staff as his personal playthings, his visits less about filial duty and more about exercising his dominance on a captive audience. "Suite 7 now," Nurse Kim snapped at Zora, her own fear making her sharp. "The chairman's tea. Make sure it is perfect, hot, but not scalding. You know how he is." Zora gave a slight deferential nod. "Yes, head nurse." Her voice was low and steady, a stark contrast to the nervous energy flooding the corridor. Inside, she suppressed a reaction. Park Min-jun was already there, standing over his father's bed. He was a man sculpted by privilege, his suit a shimmering sheath of charcoal silk that probably cost more than Zora's car. A Patek Philippe watch on his wrist that could have paid for Nana Rose's entire treatment outright. He wasn't speaking to his father. He was holding his phone, angled down, a smirk playing on his lips as he narrated in rapid, mocking Korean for some unseen audience on a video call. "You see, the old tiger has no teeth left, just lies here, dreaming of the old days. He can't even control his own bladder, much less a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But don't worry, I'm managing his affairs, very diligently. Zora's stomach tightened. The disrespect was a physical blow in the silent room. This was the wound of this place, the casual, performative cruelty of the powerful. She moved to the side table, her focus narrowing to the task at hand, the antique porcelain teapot, the delicate cup, the precise temperature of the water. Control the things you can control. That was the first rule of survival. The life she'd left behind, the one where she wore a different kind of uniform, had taught her that. 4 years as a U.S. Army intelligence analyst, specializing in East Asian financial networks, attached to a forward operating base. That life felt like a dream now, a story that had happened to someone else. It was a past she had buried under a mountain of medical debt and filial duty. All that remained were the instincts, the stillness under pressure, the hyper-awareness of her surroundings, the ability to build a fortress inside her own mind. She straightened, the tea tray balanced perfectly in her hands. She turned, her path taking her past the foot of the bed. And that's when Park Min-joon finally noticed her. His eyes, cold and dismissive, swept over her. A predator noticing a field mouse. The smirk on his face widened. He ended his call with a flick of his thumb, slipping the phone into his pocket. The show was no longer for a remote audience. It was for him. He stepped directly into her path, forcing her to an abrupt halt. The air crackled with his volatile energy. He looked from her face to the tray and back again, his expression one of theatrical disgust. "What is this?" His voice in English was slick with contempt. He gestured at her, a flick of his wrist that dismissed her entire existence. "They're letting the help get darker and darker in this place. Did you even wash your hands?" Zora stood perfectly still. The antiseptic air seemed to hold its breath. She kept her gaze fixed on a point just over his shoulder, her face a neutral mask. To react was to give him what he wanted. To show anger was a luxury. To show fear was a death sentence. Survival was a calculus of indignity. He chuckled, a low, ugly sound. He switched to Korean, the language rolling off his tongue with a smug, performative flourish, assuming, as they all did, a wall of incomprehension that made him safe. "Look at this thing," he said, his voice loud enough for his father to hear, a deliberate provocation. "Geomeun Yoja, a black girl, in my father's room, probably stealing the silver. They send these creatures from the bottom of the world and expect us to treat them like people." The racial slur hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Zora's blood ran cold, but her posture remained unchanged. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to deploy the phrases she knew in 5 languages that could strip a man like him bare. But the image of Nana Rose's face flashed in her mind. $287,451. Breathe. Endure. Min-joon took another step closer, his cologne, a cloying, expensive musk, invading her space. He pointed a manicured finger at the teacup on her tray. "My father's tea. Is it right? Is it perfect?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Or is it as bitter and dirty as you are?" She did not answer. Silence was her only weapon, a shield of dignity he could not penetrate. Her refusal to be baited seemed to enrage him further. His eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in their depths. The game had changed. He needed a more visceral reaction. "Clumsy," he murmured, his hand darting out. It happened in slow motion. His fingers brushed against the edge of the tray. A deliberate, calculated tip. The porcelain teapot and cup slid. A graceful, terrible arc through the air. The scalding hot liquid, a pale amber stream, splashed across the front of her uniform and down her right forearm. Pain, white-hot and immediate, shot up her arm. A strangled gasp escaped her lips before she could stop it. The delicate cup shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent suite. Min-joon stepped back, a look of faux concern on his face. He held up his hands as if innocent. "Oh my, you should be more careful. Such a terrible, clumsy girl." He pulled out his phone again, the camera lens a cold black eye. He was filming her, her pain a piece of content for his amusement. "Let's get a good look at that. Maybe the hospital will take it out of your paycheck." The other staff members, drawn by the sound, stood frozen in the doorway. Head nurse Kim's face was a mask of horror, but she was paralyzed. caught between protocol and the terrifying reality of who Park Min-joon was. No one moved, no one spoke, they just watched. Zora's world narrowed to the searing fire on her skin, the sharp sting of humiliation, and the cold, unblinking lens of the phone. The burn was bad. She could feel it blistering already. A clinical part of her mind assessed the damage, second degree most likely. Another part of her was screaming, a silent primal roar of outrage. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. 3 seconds where the world stood still. 3 seconds where she weighed a lifetime of Nana Rose's sacrifices against this single, unbearable moment. 3 seconds where the subservient nurse and the intelligence analyst waged a war inside her. The analyst won. She did not cry out. She did not flinch. With a deliberate, controlled movement, she placed the now empty tray on a nearby table. She straightened to her full height, her spine going rigid as steel. Her chin lifted. And for the first time, she met Park Min-joon's eyes. The neutral mask was gone. In its place was something cold, ancient, and absolute. From the doorway, a voice cut through the tension. It was quiet, yet it carried the weight of absolute command. "That is enough, Min-joon." Every head turned. Kwon Ji-yul stood there, flanked by 2 silent men in impeccable dark suits. He hadn't been there a moment ago. He moved with a predatory stillness, a panther entering a room of startled deer. The room's reaction was immediate and visceral. Park Min-joon's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of irritation and something close to fear. Head nurse Kim looked as if she might faint. Ji-yul's presence changed the very atmosphere of the room. He was the head of the rival Cheongryong syndicate, a man whose power was not inherited but forged in the brutal crucible of Seoul's underworld. He was dressed in a simple black suit, but it fit him with a perfection that spoke of obscene expense. The watch on his wrist was a muted Audemars Piguet, a piece of quiet lethality that could have paid off Zora's entire debt twice over. His hair was black and immaculate, but it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were cold, calculating, and seemed to miss nothing. They were the last thing you saw, and the thing that marked him as dangerous. He ignored Min-joon entirely. His gaze swept the room, taking in the shattered cup, the spreading tea stain on the carpet, and finally resting on Zora. He saw the angry red welt on her arm, the rigid control in her posture, the fire in her eyes. He held her gaze for a fraction of a second, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Then he looked away, his attention settling on the old man in the bed. "Chairman," Ji-yul's voice was low and respectful, a stark contrast to Min-joon's earlier mockery. Min-joon, incensed at being ignored, stepped forward. "Kwon Ji-yul, what are you doing here? This is a private family matter." "Your father and I have business," Ji-yul stated, his tone flat. It was not an explanation, it was a dismissal. He turned his cold eyes back to Min-joon. "You are making a scene. You are disturbing him." "This thing," Min-joon spat, gesturing at Zora, "was incompetent. She burned herself. It's a staff issue." Ji-yul's gaze flickered back to Zora's arm. He saw the clear splash pattern. He saw the deliberate way Min-joon had positioned himself. He saw the truth. But before Ji-yul could speak again, Zora moved. The decision had been made in that 3-second silence. The debt to her grandmother was a chain, but her dignity was her soul. She would not let him take both. She took a half-step forward, directing her words to Park Min-joon, but her voice was clear and carried through the entire room. She spoke in Korean. Not the standard textbook Korean of a foreigner, but a flawless formal Busan dialect, the provincial hard-edged accent of the old guard of his father's generation, the dialect of the docks and the back rooms where empires were built. "An issue of staff competency is best addressed with precision. Wouldn't you agree, Sajang-nim?" she began, using his formal title with an icy precision that turned it into an insult. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe tilting on its axis. Park Min-joon froze. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed shock. His associates, who had been snickering behind him, were now rigid as statues. Head nurse Kim's hand flew to her mouth. Even Kwon Ji-yul's impassive expression shifted, a flicker of profound surprise in his cold eyes. Zora's posture had transformed. She was no longer the deferential nurse. She stood with her shoulders squared, her spine straight, her presence suddenly filling the room. The uniform was the same, but the woman inside it was a stranger. She continued, her Busan dialect becoming even more pronounced, more specific. She corrected the grammar he had used when mocking his father. When addressing your esteemed father, the honorific suffix kiso is required. Your use of you edge implies a lack of respect. A son should know this. It is a matter of basic filial piety. It was a devastating blow, a public shaming delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She had not only understood his insults, she had dissected his character with his own language. To twist the knife, she added a final, quiet sentence, laced with the specific gravelly slang of the Busan Jopok, the old-school gangsters. Hyungnimdel are always watching. A man who disrespects his own house loses it. That was for him, and for Kwon Ji-yul. It was a direct challenge, a signal that she knew their world, their codes. Minjun was sputtering, his face a mottled mess of fury and humiliation. Who? What are you? How do you? I'm the nurse you just assaulted, Zora said, her voice now deadly quiet. She switched back to perfect, unaccented English. The clumsy one. Do you need me to file a formal report, or will your video suffice as evidence? He lunged for her, a guttural roar of pure rage tearing from his throat. But he never reached her. Ji-yul's men moved with silent, impossible speed, intercepting him, each taking an arm in a grip that was as unbreakable as it was discreet. Ji-yul himself hadn't moved an inch. He was watching Zora, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, dangerous respect. From the bed, a weak, raspy voice spoke for the first time. Let her speak. All eyes turned to Chairman Park. The old man had pushed himself up on one elbow, his eyes, once dull, now burning with a fierce, lucid light. He was looking at Zora, not as a nurse, but as if seeing her for the very first time. Leave us, the chairman commanded, his voice thin but laced with the iron authority that had built an empire. Minjun struggled against the guards. Father, she is no one, a foreign spy. She is more of a son to me in this moment than you have been in 10 years, the old man rasped. Get out. The finality in his tone was absolute. Ji-yul's men didn't wait for a second command. They efficiently escorted the struggling, cursing Park Min-jun from the room, his associates scrambling after him like frightened rats. The suite was silent again, but the atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. It was now a space of consequence. Kwon Ji-yul walked slowly toward Zora. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze intense. He gestured to her arm. That needs to be treated. His voice was a low rumble. I'm aware, Zora replied, her own voice steady despite the adrenaline singing in her veins and the fire on her skin. He studied her face, searching for something. Who are you? My name is Zora Evans. I am Chairman Park's nurse. You are more than that, he stated. It wasn't a question. Yes. The silence stretched between them, a negotiation taking place without words. He saw not a victim, but a survivor, a weapon. She saw not a gangster, but a potential resource, a platform. Min-jun will not let this go, Ji-yul said, his voice flat. He has been publicly humiliated. He is a vengeful coward. You are in danger now. Your family is in danger. Zora's blood ran cold at the mention of her family. Nana rose. He was right. She had won the battle, but the war had just begun. Her defiance had come at a price she might not be able to pay. I am aware of that as well, she said, her voice tight. Ji-yul continued to watch her, his mind clearly working, calculating angles and risks. The Busan dialect. The slang. Where did you learn it? Fort Huachuca mostly, and a few years stationed at Yongsan Garrison, she answered, the names of the U.S. Army intelligence posts falling from her lips like foreign objects in this opulent room. My specialty was forensic accounting of East Asian criminal enterprises. A flicker of understanding, of dawning comprehension, crossed his face. An intelligence analyst, a soldier, not a nurse. The pieces clicked into place, her stillness, her precision, her shocking fluency. You are no longer just a nurse, Ms. Evans, he said. You have made yourself a player in a game you may not understand. I understand the players, Zora countered, her chin high. I just didn't have a seat at the table, until now. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Respect. Minjun is a cancer in his father's organization. He is reckless, involved in things that bring dishonor and unwanted attention. Things I have been investigating myself. But my reach is limited. I am an outsider. Here it was. The offer. And I'm an insider, Zora finished for him. The invisible one. The one no one pays attention to. You are no longer invisible, he corrected her. But you have access. You have a unique perspective. And you clearly have a set of skills that are unexpected. It was a trade, not a gift of rescue. A partnership born of mutual necessity. He had the infrastructure, the money, the security, the network. She had the skills, the analytical mind, the language, the access, the ability to see what they couldn't. I need protection, Zora said, laying her terms on the table. Absolute, unconditional protection for my grandmother. Her name is Rose Williams. She is at the Silverlight Cancer Clinic. I also need the resources to find out exactly what Minjun is doing, everything he is involved in. I want to destroy him. The words were cold steel. And what do I get in return? Jiul asked, his voice a low murmur. You get the cancer cut out of your rival's house before it metastasizes and threatens your own, Zora replied without hesitation. You get to absorb what's left, and you get the satisfaction of watching a man who embodies dishonor get what he deserves. He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes boring into hers. Then, a rare, thin smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes, but it was a tectonic shift in his stony expression. Deal, he said. He pulled a slim black burner phone from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. This is a secure line. My personal number is the only one programmed in it. You will have a security detail on your grandmother within the hour. A car will be waiting for you at the end of your shift. It will take you to a safe location where we can talk further. She took the phone. Its cool metallic weight felt like a weapon in her hand. A key. First, she said, her voice firm, I'm going to treat this burn, and then I'm going to finish my shift. I am, after all, a professional. For the first time, the smile in Quan Jiul's eyes matched the one on his lips. He had not found a victim to save. He had found an ally. The safe house was a minimalist masterpiece of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the Han River. It was a world away from the cramped apartment Zora shared with her grandmother. Jiul had provided her with a laptop, military-grade and encrypted, and unlimited access to his organization's considerable resources. For the next 3 days, Zora didn't sleep. She worked, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering fury. The nurse's uniform was gone, replaced by simple, practical clothes. The deferential ghost of the hospital was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused analyst she had once been. She dove into the digital labyrinth of Park Min-jun's life, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and confidence that was mesmerizing to watch. Jiul would often stand in the doorway of the study, silent, observing her work. He never interrupted, never questioned her methods. He simply watched as she peeled back the layers of Minjun's empire. It was worse than she could have imagined. Minjun wasn't just skimming from the corporate accounts. He was using the Hyson Pharmaceutical Shipping Division, the very one that supplied St. Lazarus, as a front. He was trafficking massive quantities of a new, deadly synthetic opioid, piggybacking the illicit shipments on legitimate medical supply routes. The money was being laundered through a dizzying network of shell corporations and offshore accounts. But then she found the second layer, the personal one. Cross-referencing the pharmacy's dispensary logs with Chairman Park's medical charts, she found a discrepancy, a fatal one. Minjun had been bribing one of the junior pharmacists to slowly, methodically poison his own father, using a complex cocktail of drugs designed to mimic the symptoms of a slow, natural decline. He wasn't waiting for the tiger to die. He was killing him. The discovery made her physically ill. The cold fury inside her solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. This wasn't just about revenge for a burn and an insult anymore. It was about justice. He's poisoning his father, she told Jiul, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. She turned the laptop screen toward him, displaying the damning evidence. The chemical markers are undeniable. He's been microdosing him for months. Jiul's face, usually an unreadable mask, hardened. In their world, there were codes, rules of conduct, even among killers and thieves. Parricide was the ultimate taboo, a sin that stained everyone associated with it. This changes things, he said, his voice a low growl. "This gives us leverage over his entire organization. The captains will abandon him if they know this." "Knowing and proving are two different things," Zora countered. "The digital trail is circumstantial. I need the physical evidence. I need the source vials from the hospital pharmacy's secure storage." "That's impossible," Jiul stated. "It's biometric, time-locked, and monitored." "Not impossible," Zora said, a glint in her eye. "Just difficult. I know the schedules. I know the security protocols. I know the blind spots in the camera coverage. I was a nurse there, remember? I was invisible. I saw everything." This was her solo operation, her test. She refused his offer of backup. "Your men would be noticed. I won't be. I just need a distraction, a big one, something that pulls all high-level security to the front of the building for exactly 10 minutes. Jiul's plan for a distraction was a direct frontal assault, a show of force. Zora overruled him immediately. "No, that's a hammer. We need a scalpel," she insisted, her voice firm. She was no longer his asset, she was his strategist. "A hammer makes noise and leaves a mess. It puts the entire hospital on lockdown. A scalpel is silent, precise, and clean. Call in a bomb threat, but not a generic one. Use specific terminology. Mention a chemical agent. It'll trigger a hazmat protocol, not a SWAT response. It will draw the security chiefs to the main entrance to meet the first responders, but it won't lock down the service corridors in the back. It gives me the window I need." Jiul stared at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. He had been thinking like a gangster. She was thinking like an intelligence operative. He gave a single sharp nod. He was deferring to her judgment. The next night, Zora walked back into St. Lazarus. She wasn't wearing a nurse's uniform, but the dark gray coveralls of the night shift maintenance crew. Her face was smudged with a bit of grease, her hair tucked under a baseball cap. She was invisible again, but this time it was camouflage. As she slipped through a service entrance, she heard the first faint sound of sirens in the distance. The distraction had begun. She moved quickly and silently through the labyrinthine basement corridors, her mind a calm, cool map of the building's layout. She reached the pharmacy's secure storage unit just as a flurry of urgent calls began to crackle over the security guards' radios. The lock was biometric, but Zora had a workaround. During her time as a nurse, she'd observed the head pharmacist, a man with a weakness for expensive coffee. A carefully lifted latent fingerprint from his favorite mug, reproduced on a thin layer of silicone, was all she needed. The light on the scanner flashed green. The heavy door hissed open. She had 4 minutes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She moved to the refrigerated unit where the specialty drugs were kept, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She found the vials, their labels matching the lot numbers from her research. She carefully extracted a small sample from each, placing them in a sterile, padded container. Just as she was closing the unit, she heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming down the corridor. It wasn't security. Their boots had a different sound. These were leather-soled dress shoes. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. She doused her light, pressing herself into the deep shadows behind a shelving unit. 2 of Minjun's men entered the storage room. They weren't there by chance. They were looking for something. "He said it would be here," one of them grumbled in Korean. "The backup ledger." Zora held her breath. A ledger. Minjun was not just evil, he was stupid. He kept a hard copy of his transactions. The men began searching, their movements clumsy and loud. They were getting closer to her position. Zora knew she couldn't fight her way out, but she could think her way out. Her eyes darted around the dark room, landing on a large red box on the wall, the emergency halon fire suppression system. A warning label clearly stated it would displace all oxygen in the room within 30 seconds of activation. It was a massive risk, but it was the only way. As one of the men turned his back, Zora moved. She pulled the lever. A deafening alarm blared, and the vents in the ceiling began to hiss, spewing the colorless, odorless gas. The men yelled in surprise and confusion. "What is that? The alarm! Forget the ledger. Let's go!" They scrambled for the door, choking and coughing. Zora held her breath, her lungs burning, counting the seconds. 10, 15. She had to wait for them to be clear of the corridor. 20. Her vision started to tunnel. 25. She burst from her hiding place, sprinting for the door, her lungs screaming for air. She stumbled out into the corridor just as the heavy door sealed shut behind her. She collapsed against the far wall, gasping, dragging precious oxygen into her starved lungs. She had the samples. She was alive. She was making her way back to the service exit when her burner phone vibrated. It was a text from Jiul. Asset compromised. Minjun's men entering my office building. Frontal assault. Zora's blood went cold. Minjun was panicking, lashing out. Jiul was a formidable fighter, but his office was a known location. It was a trap. While he focused on the men coming through the front door, he would be vulnerable from behind. She didn't hesitate. She ran. She knew a shortcut, a series of back alleys that would get her to his building faster than any car. She arrived at the rear entrance, a simple steel door, and used the emergency code Jiul had given her. Inside, the sounds of a brutal fight echoed from the main office upstairs. Zora didn't go toward the sound. She went to the security room in the basement. The guard was gone, likely pulled into the fray. The monitors showed Jiul and his 2 bodyguards efficiently, brutally, dispatching the attackers in the lobby. They were winning, but Zora saw what they couldn't. A 5th attacker and a 6th, not with the main group. They were moving through the HVAC system on the roof, heading for the skylight directly above Jiul's personal office. An ambush. She grabbed the intercom microphone. "Jiul!" she yelled, her voice strained. "Roof! 2 men! Above your office! Now!" On the screen, she saw Jiul's head snap up. He barked an order in Korean. He and his men abandoned the lobby fight and sprinted up the stairs just as the attackers crashed through the skylight. Because of her warning, he was ready. The fight was short and decisive. But as the last man fell, Zora saw it on the monitor. Another threat, one no one had anticipated. A sniper's red laser dot appeared on Jiul's chest, coming from the building across the street. There was no time to warn him. Zora acted on pure instinct. She slammed the fire alarm panel for the entire building, a deafening klaxon that would momentarily disorient everyone, including the sniper. Then she sprinted from the security room, taking the stairs 2 at a time, her body moving with a speed and power she hadn't called on in years. She burst into the ruined office. Jiul was standing over the last attacker, his back to the shattered window. The red dot was still there, dancing on his chest. "Get down!" she screamed. He turned, his eyes widening in confusion. He didn't have time to react. Zora didn't hesitate. She launched herself at him, a full-body tackle that sent the powerful Mafia boss flying backward, crashing to the floor behind his heavy mahogany desk. A split second later, the window behind where he had been standing exploded inward. A shower of glass and the sharp crack of a high-velocity rifle shot echoing through the room. She had saved him. Lying on the floor, the formidable Kwon Ji-yul looked up at her, his expression one of stunned disbelief. The protection, for the second time that night, had flowed both ways. She wasn't just his analyst. She wasn't just his ally. She was his shield, and in his cold, calculating eyes, she saw something new. Not just respect, something that looked terrifyingly like devotion. The final confrontation was not set in a dark alley or a warehouse. It was Zora's plan, a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It took place in the main boardroom of the Hasan corporate headquarters, on the 50th floor, overlooking the sprawling city of Seoul. At Zora's quiet suggestion, relayed through a now-recovering Chairman Park, an emergency meeting of the board of directors had been called. Park Min-jun stormed into the room, his face a mask of arrogant fury. He expected to intimidate the old men on the board, to solidify his coup. He stopped dead when he saw who was sitting at the head of the table, in his father's chair. It was Zora. She was no longer in a nurse's uniform or a maintenance worker's coveralls. She wore a bespoke, razor-sharp suit of deep charcoal gray, tailored to her body with military precision. Her hair was down, styled in soft waves that framed a face of calm, unshakable authority. She looked like she owned the room. In that moment, she did. To her right sat Chairman Park, looking frail but with the fire back in his eyes. To her left sat Kwon Ji-yul, a silent, menacing statue of loyalty. The rest of the board members, powerful men in their own right, watched the scene with a mixture of confusion and fear. Min-jun stared at her, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the clumsy black nurse with the commanding woman before him. "You," he breathed, the word a mixture of venom and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this? What is she doing here?" Zora didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, letting his panic build. Then she looked at him, her gaze as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "I'm here to present the board with a forensic audit of the Heisen Pharmaceutical Division," she said, her voice calm and clear. She spoke in Korean, her Busan dialect a deliberate, cutting reminder of their first meeting. "A division which you, Sajang Nim, have been running into the ground." She didn't use a PowerPoint presentation. She didn't play a video. She simply spoke. With devastating precision, she laid out his entire operation. She detailed the opioid trafficking scheme, naming the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the exact shipping routes he had used. She recited account numbers and transaction dates from memory, her intelligence analyst's mind a flawless repository of his crimes. The board members began to murmur, their faces growing pale. Minjun's bravado began to crack. "Lies!" he shouted, his voice shrill. "These are baseless accusations from a foreign corporate spy, paid for by our rival." He pointed a trembling finger at Ji-Yul. "A rival?" Zora's voice dropped, becoming deadly quiet. "Is Kwon Ji-Yul the rival who put thallium sulfate and aconitine in your father's tea every morning for 6 months? The one who signed the pharmacist's illegal bonus checks from a shadow account in the Cayman Islands?" She slid a single thin file across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Min Jun. "That is the sworn confession of head pharmacist Choi. He was remarkably cooperative once he realized you were setting him up to be the sole scapegoat." Min Jun's face went white. He was trapped, utterly and completely defeated. His empire, built on cruelty and disrespect, had been dismantled by the woman he had seen as less than human. He did the only thing a cornered rat could do. He lunged, not at his father, not at Ji-Yul, but at Zora. It was a primal scream of hatred, the final, pathetic act of a broken man. He never reached her. Ji-Yul moved like a blur, but it was Chairman Park who acted first. The old man, with a surge of renewed strength, slammed his heavy wooden cane down on the table with a crack like a gunshot. "Enough!" The command, roared with the full force of his old authority, froze Min Jun in his tracks. The old chairman struggled to his feet, his eyes blazing with a terrible, righteous fury as he looked at his only son. "You are not my blood," he rasped, his voice shaking with grief and rage. "My son died a long time ago. I don't know what you are." He turned to Ji-Yul's men, who now flanked the doors. "Remove this stranger from my company, and from my life." As Min Jun was dragged away, screaming threats and begging for mercy, Zora stood up. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city below. Justice had been served, not by a court, not by the police, who were only now arriving in the lobby, a cleanup crew for a war already won, but by her hand, by her mind. 6 months later, the air at the port of Incheon smelled of salt, diesel, and possibility. Zora stood on the docks, a clipboard in her hand, her eyes scanning a massive container ship being loaded with cargo. She wore a practical but stylish jacket against the sea breeze, her posture relaxed but authoritative. She was the new head of logistics and risk management for Kwon Ji-Yul's rapidly expanding and increasingly legitimate global shipping enterprise. She wasn't just wearing the title, she was doing the job, her mind effortlessly tracking a dozen complex variables at once. Her phone buzzed. It was a video call. She smiled as she answered. On the screen, Nana Rose was in her garden, the South Carolina sun warming her face. She was thinner, but her eyes were bright, and her hands, no longer frail, were tending to a row of vibrant red roses. She was in remission. She was home. "They're beautiful, Nana," Zora said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not as beautiful as you, my darling," her grandmother's voice crackled through the phone. "You come home soon, you hear?" "I will, Nana, I promise." She ended the call as a sleek black car pulled up beside her. Kwon Ji-Yul got out. He didn't speak. He just came and stood beside her, following her gaze out to the endless expanse of the ocean. He held out a steaming ceramic mug. It was ginseng tea, the same kind she had been serving the day her life changed, the same kind that had been spilled on her. She took the mug, her fingers brushing against his. A jolt, quiet and electric, passed between them. It was not a gesture of romance, but of recognition, a closing of a circle, an acknowledgement of a debt paid, and a partnership forged in fire and humiliation. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the ship, a symbol of their new, shared future. He had given her a platform. She had given him a vision. She had arrived in this country a ghost, an invisible servant trapped by circumstance. Now, she was a queen in her own right, her position earned not by birth or by gift, but by competence, courage, and an unshakable sense of her own worth. She was finally home, not in a place, but in the quiet, absolute certainty of being seen. She had faced down the worst of this world and had not only survived, but triumphed. What would you have done? If you enjoyed Zora's story of justice and transformation, like and subscribe for more tales of powerful women who refuse to be broken.